Chapter 5 of Zhang Henshui's Cause of Crying and Laughing. There are traces of residual fat on the cheeks, which are traces of romance. The hand is added to indicate that the thoughts are speechless. But it is said that the nurse said to Shugu, "That is your Jia Baoyu, right?" This sentence woke Guan Shoufeng up and asked whose Baoyu it was. Shugu was in a hurry, but the nurse smiled calmly and said, "I picked up a fake gemstone and gave it to her to play with, but she lost it. Just now I saw a broken porcelain stone under the table and thought it was a fake gemstone." Shoufeng smiled and said, "That's it. You said it in a panic, which scared me. I didn't notice, so I calmed down, stood up, pretended to pack the things on the table and put down the book. From now on, I will not dare to read novels in front of my father." Since this weather, Shoufeng's illness has gradually improved. The family trees come to visit more sparsely. Shoufeng thought about it. This illness cost him a lot of money, so he couldn't afford to stay in the hospital anymore. "I told the doctor that I had decided to leave this week when my stay was full. The doctor originally wanted him to nurse for some more time. He said that all the medicines were provided by his friends, so it was not inconvenient to disturb his friends. The doctor also thought it was good and agreed to it. It happened that for a few days during this period, Jiashu never came to the hospital. On the last day, Shugu went to the accounting department to settle the accounts and get some change, so she hired a carriage and the father and daughter went home. By the time Jiashu came to the hospital to visit his patient, Guan and his daughter had already been discharged from the hospital for 2 days. Let's say that when Jiashu went to the hospital that day, he happened to meet the myopic female nurse. She smiled and said, "Mr. Fan, why haven't you come for 2 days?" Jiashu asked her abruptly because of her words, thinking that it was Guan's father. The girl was a little bit surprised that I didn't come. In fact, I am not being impolite, because Shoufeng's illness has really recovered, and there is no need to come to see him as a hypocritical favor. As he pondered like this, the female nurse smiled and said, "Miss Guan must be very understanding, but Mr. Fan should also go to his home to visit." Although Jiashu felt that the female nurse had misunderstood, it didn't matter. If it is important, then there is no justification. When Jiashu left the hospital, she felt it was still early, so she went to the back door to Guan's house. Shugu was shopping for groceries outside the gate. She suddenly raised her head, took a step back, and said with a smile, "Mr. Fan, I'm really sorry that we moved out of the hospital without any notice." Shudao, "Uncle is too polite. Since I invited him to the hospital, why do I care about the last few days? I have been too busy these days and did not come to the hospital to see Uncle Guan. I feel so wrong. Come on. I came here to apologize." After hearing this, Shugu blushed first, lowered her head and smiled. No, you really misunderstood. We are sorry. As long as we can recover at home, there is no need. I'm not going to the hospital anymore. Please sit at home," he said, guiding me from the front. When Guan Shoufeng heard the sound of the family tree in the house, he shouted, "Hey, Mr. Fan? I don't dare to take it seriously." Jiashu walked into the room and saw him leaning on a pile of high quilts and sitting on the bedside. He was much better and healthier. He smiled and said, "Uncle is really well, but I don't know how his diet is now." Shoufeng nodded and said, "I'm recovering soon. It's rare that my brother saved my life. When I recover, I will definitely." Jiashu smiled and said, "Uncle, we have already said that we don't want to say anything about repaying gratitude, so why bring it up again? Are you up?" Shugu said, "Mr. Fan, you must know that my father always says what he wants. He thinks like this in his heart, and if you don't want him to say it, he will feel even sadder in his heart." Jiashu said, "In that case, if Uncle wants to say anything, just say it. It is not good for people who are in good health to feel depressed. It is better to let the uncle speak out." Shoufeng concentrated for a while, ran his hand through his beard that had not been shaved for a long time, smiled slightly and said, "Yes, I have a few words. Don't say them now. Let's talk about it after I get to the ground." When Shugu heard her father, "If you say so, you can hide your head and show your tail, which is easy to create monsters. Moreover, my father smiled for the first time since he fell ill. There must be something wonderful about it." Thinking of this, I felt ashamed and embarrassed to stand in the room, so I walked out. Jiashu also felt that what Shoufeng said was a bit embarrassing. After Shugu heard this, he avoided it again, and the traces became more obvious. After talking to Shoufeng for a while, he comforted him a few words and then left. Shu Gaiwan was standing in the yard. At this time, she used the excuse of closing the door to send the family tree out. Jiashu didn't dare to be too humble. He just nodded and kept walking. When Jiashu returned home, she thought about how Guan Shoufeng said those words today. No wonder my cousin said I love his daughter, even he himself meant it. As for Shugu, it's different. Ever since she saw me, she seemed to be affectionate. Now that I am helping his father like this, it is natural that she will misunderstand her. Fortunately, Shoufeng's illness is finally cured now, and it doesn't matter if I don't go see him. From now on, I'd better stay away from his father and daughter, otherwise my good intentions will end up having other agendas. Then again, there is a deep affection for me between Shugu's eyebrows. How does she know my current situation? Thinking of this, I couldn't help but take out the photo Fengxi gave me from the book and hold it in my hand to look at it. Looking at Fengxi's smiling face, I felt that her charming appearance was definitely not comparable to Shugu's honest appearance. After she goes to school and adds a bit of civilized image, it will become even better. If I cultivate her like this in my hands, I will really recognize a hero before I meet her. In the future, when she has knowledge, she will naturally be more grateful to me. When I wanted to go, I felt so complacent that I couldn't sit still in the room. I looked in the mirror, straightened my hair, and got in the car to Shuchu Hutong. Now, Fengxi's house has been tiddied up. Fengxi changed into a thin and narrow gown with a white background and blue mandarin duck plaid. She leaned against the door frame and stared at the white clouds in the sky in trance. When she lowered her head, she suddenly saw the family tree and smiled. Didn't you say you won't come today, and will come back when I move to the new house? Jiashu smiled and said, I have nothing to do at home, so I want to invite you to go out and play. Fengxi said, my mother and my uncle has gone to clean up the new house. I have to look after the house at home. You have come to me and been wronged more than once. Fortunately, I will move tomorrow. The wronged you will only last for today. You are here with me. Let's talk here. Don't go all the way to the park. Jiashu smiled and said, you don't have anyone at home. How dare you keep me? He took out the long handkerchief tucked under his waist and shook it towards the family tree. Jiashu said, I am telling the truth. What do you mean? Fengxi said, you are not a robber. Why are you here to rob me? Besides, I am only a person and have nothing to rob. I will leave you to sit here in the clear sky and in the daytime. What's the big deal? Jiashu said with a smile, you said there is only one person, but you know there is a kind of bandit who wants to rob people. Have you never sung the story of robbing Mrs. Yazai? She twisted her body and said, I won't tell you anymore. As she said that, she jumped into the room inside. Jiashu also said, are you really afraid of me? Why did you run away? After saying this, he also ran in. The broken table in the room had been replaced with a new one a long time ago, and today a white tablecloth was added. The old quilt on the kang had also been thrown away long ago, and all the new beddings were covered with a large white cloth sheet. Jiashu asked, why is this? You are moving tomorrow, and you are so busy doing a new look today? Fengxi smiled and said, when you come to our place, you always say it is unhygienic. We have washed it and brushed it. Yes, it has been changed, but you are still not happy. Yesterday, you told my mother that everything in the hospital was really clean. My mother believed you and rushed to buy a white cloth to cover it today. I originally wanted red beds and wooden tables for the new house over there. I believed you and went to change them to white ones today. Jiashu said with a smile, it's a bit over the top, but it's well-intentioned. Fengxi stepped forward, grabbed his sleeve and said, that won't work, just tremble and curse. As he spoke, he puffed his lips and twisted his body a few times. Jiashu smiled and said, I am not scolding, I am saying that your family can listen to me very well. Naturally, now my whole family is counting on you to live their lives. How can I not listen to you? But I have benefited a lot from you. When I thought about it carefully, I became embarrassed again. According to you, your old man has been a high-ranking official and even opened a bank in Tianjin. Your family status is so high. How can you be worthy of people like us who can sing drums? As he said that, he sat down on the chair, lowered his head, and reached back to play with the ends of his braids. Jiashu smiled and said, I don't quite understand what you are saying. What are you talking about? Is it worthy? Fengxi glanced at it, then lowered his head and said, don't pretend to be stupid. You were selected from among the smart people. How can you not understand? Jiashu smiled and said, I understand, obviously, but my father has passed away a long time ago. What does a high official have to do with it? My uncle is just a prime minister in Tianjin Bank, and he is also doing things for others. He is not very rich. Even if we are rich, we are uncle and nephew, who can control whom. The reason why I let you read is to increase your knowledge, but it also means to improve your status. But if you read the book well and your status is improved, don't forget me. Feng Shi smiled and said, to be honest, our family really treats you as a god. You see how much they fawn over you. I'm really afraid that you might be a little bit unhappy. Not to mention, I have been counting on you my whole life. How could I forget you? Not to mention whether your status is elevated or not, even if you are elevated, it all depends on you. The human heart is made of flesh. Now that I don't have to show my face, I feel as if I have ascended to heaven in peace. Where can I find such a benefactor with a lantern on? Am I really a fool and don't understand this at all? Feng Shi's words were very sincere. When Jiashu saw her lowering her head and looking at her crossed and swaying toes, he stood next to her, slowly stroked her hair with his hands, and said with a smile, what you said is an honest statement, and I believe it. As long as you stay like this, I don't care how much money you spend. How much do you still have of the 200 yuan I gave you? Feng Shi looked at it. Jiashu smiled and said, your uncle is a banker. How much money can be used to do a lot of things? Do you think you don't understand? Add clothes, buy things, move a house. How much money do you think you have left? Jiashu said, it's not enough to think about it. Go to the bank tomorrow, and I'll find some money for you. Seeing Feng Shi's face turned up and her face fragrant, he touched her face with his hand. Feng Shi smiled and moved her mouth toward the door of the room. When Jiashu looked back, she saw that it was a newly made door curtain rolled up high, so she didn't feel smile at all. After a while, Feng Shi's uncle came back. He was the man who played the Sangxianzi at the Jinnong altar. His original name was Shen Shengd, but the neighbors in this alley call him Shen Sangxianzi. And because the 4 words were too cumbersome, the name was reduced to Shen Sangxian. After calling him for a long time, he changed his name to Shen Sangshuan. Note: Zuan is an old Beijing proverb. It means that everything is uncertain and dangerous. This means that he eats, drinks, and smokes, 3 major things, which will lead to famine every day. However, in the past half month, with the help of Fan Jiashu, the god of wealth, Shen Sangshuan has become Shen Sanli. After tidying up the new house for a long time today, he felt tired and asked his sister-in-law, Aunt Shen, for some money to smoke. Aunt Shen said that she gave her $1 yesterday and could not give her any more today, so he ran back again and planned to discuss it with his niece. As soon as I walked into the outer room, I saw that the curtain of the inner room had been lowered, so it was difficult to go in. First, he coughed twice through the door curtain. Feng Shi said, is uncle back? How is the house over there organized? Mr. Fan is here. Shen Sangshuan called Mr. Fan through the door curtain and stopped coming in. Feng Shi opened the door curtain, and Shen Sangshuan smiled and said, girl, I have run out of black rice again today. Please help me. Jiashu said, I think you are afraid of this big smoke. It's been a long time since I had problems eating. I can't bear to add another big smoke. Shen Sangshuan nodded and said in a low voice, what you said is that I had already planned to avoid it. Jiashu said with a smile, smokers are all like this. As soon as you mention that they should avoid smoking, they will say that they have already stopped smoking. But after saying it 1,000 times and 10,000 times, they turn their backs and continue to smoke. Shen Sangshuan saw the family tree. Looking unhappy, Feng Shi sat on the edge of the kang, her left leg pressed against her right leg, her hands crossed, hugging her knees, and her 2 small cheeks were as tight as bulging. When Shen Sangshuan saw this look, he could no longer ask for money. He had no choice but to strike up a conversation with the people in the same yard and then walked away. Jiashu looked at Feng Shi and smiled softly. It's really annoying, not first, not later. He just happened to come back at this time. Feng Shi also smiled and said, don't talk nonsense. He heard it and doesn't know what we did. Yeah. Jiashu said, I think he's probably asking for money. Just. Feng Shi said, don't pay attention to him. What's wrong with him? What else can he do? He is addicted to tobacco and alcohol and has long been unable to survive. Now he says that it is all his fault that I know you, and it will last forever. $1 a day is not enough, but the future will last forever, you think? How can you let him have his way? Jiashu said with a smile, I thought you were just smart before, but now it seems that you are very knowledgeable and will be good at living at home in the future. Feng Shi glanced at him and said, You are talking and you are not serious again. Jiashu smiled and put his face together. Before he could answer, Feng Shi said yo, took out a handkerchief from his body, took a step forward, and pressed Jiashu's hand. The arm said, Lower your head. Just as Jiashu was about to lower her head, Feng Shi's mother, Aunt Shen, stepped in. Feng Shi shrank back, and Jiashu was also a little embarrassed. Aunt Shen said, The house over there is all tittied up. We will move tomorrow. When Mr. Fan comes to our house tomorrow, we will have a place to sit. But then again, if we move tomorrow, it will still be a mess. The day after tomorrow, it's probably fine. Otherwise, I'd be happy to go there early the day after tomorrow. Jiashu smiled when he heard about it. However, it is not natural in my heart, and I still can't explain it. After sitting for a while, Yin said, You should pack your things. I won't disturb you here. After saying that, he took the hat and put it on his head, got up and left. Feng Shi was very anxious when she saw him leaving. She waved to him several times and said, Don't be in a hurry. Wipe your face before you go. Look, ouch, look, she said, with a smile. Go home. Why do you need to wipe your face for no reason? After saying this, he had already walked out of the outer room. Feng Shi pushed her mother several times and said with a smile, Mom, just tell him to wipe his face before he leaves. Aunt Shen also said with a smile, You girl, why do you make fun of Mr. Fan? I'll give you a slap in the face. Mr. Fan, please do as you please. Don't pay attention to her. Jiashu thought Feng Shi was too happy today, so he ignored her and went home. When it was time for dinner, Jiashu sat in the front, and Uncle Tao and his wife sat on both sides. Mrs. Tao was eating when she suddenly laughed and turned her head quickly, spraying rice grains all over the carpet. Bohi said, What did you think of that made you suddenly laugh? Mrs. Tao smiled and said, Come over here and I'll tell you. Bohi said, Isn't it okay for you to tell me like this? Why do you have to wait for me to come over before telling me? Mrs. Tao smiled and said, Of course there is a reason. If I were you, I would let you punish me in any way you want. Bohi listened to what his wife said, and he really put down his bowl and chopsticks and walked over. Mrs. Tao pointed at Joshu's face and smiled and said, Look what that is. Bohi looked and found that there were 6 red marks on Joshu's left cheek. There were 2 crescent-shaped marks, 1 pair on the top and 1 pair on the bottom. There were exactly 3 pairs of 6 red marks. Bohi smiled at his wife and said, So that's it. It was nothing. Yin smiled and said, Don't play any riddles. What's on my face? Tell me the truth. Mrs. Tao smiled and said, Should we tell you the truth? Or you should tell us the truth. Besides, I feel embarrassed to tell you the truth. Then she walked into the house, took out a mirror, handed it to Joshu, and said, Look at it yourself. I know what's on your face. Joshu really took the mirror and looked at it, and his face turned red, all the way to the back of his ears. Mrs. Tao smiled and said, What's the mark? Tell me. After a pause, Joshu had a solution. He smiled and said, I was wondering what happened. It turned out to be these red ink spots. What's so strange about this? It was probably stained on my face when I was writing. Bohi said, The ink wife's water can only stain her hands. How can it stain her face? Joshu said, Since it can stain her hands, it can naturally stain her face from her hands. Bohi said, This makes sense, but I wonder if the red ink on your hands is still there. This sentence reminded Joshu, and he smiled and said, It's really unfortunate. I have wiped off the red marks on my hands. Now only the ones on my face are left. Bohi heard it and just laughed. Just as he was about to say something, Mrs. Tao sat opposite and just shook her head. Bohi understood what his wife meant and stopped talking. At that moment, Joshu put down his bowl and ran back to his room. He looked in the mirror and saw that there were several bright red marks. He rubbed it with his fingers, but it was very sticky and could not be rubbed off. Liu Fu brought water for washing his face. Joshu covered his face with one hand and looked for soap all over the room. Liu Fu asked, What are you looking for, young master? Your face is disfigured. Are you looking for a band-aid? Jiashu smiled and said, "Yes, you can go out. With two of us here, I'm confused, and it's even harder to find it." Liu Fu put down the water and had to leave. Jiashu found the soap and washed his face in front of the mirror. He was wiping the red marks when Wang Ma, a maid trusted by Mrs. Tao, came in with a porcelain teacup. She smiled and said, "Young master, our wife asked me to bring a cup of vinegar. She said that if rouge is stained on the flesh and can't be washed off, just wipe it with some vinegar and it will fall off naturally." Jiashu didn't know what to do for a long time after hearing this. Wang Ma was a woman in her 20s. She always combed her hair sleekly, had a round face, and always put on powder. She was embarrassed to see men when she had sex. Now she was sent by the wife to bring this thing, which was very embarrassing. Jiashu was embarrassed again and refused to say anything, so she turned around and left. Jiashu finally wiped off the rouge, but he was too embarrassed to go out again. Anyway, it was getting late, so he went to bed. When it came to breakfast the next day, he was still embarrassed. Fortunately, Bohe and his wife didn't mention it at all, but Mrs. Tao smiled a little. After dinner, Jiashu thought that Feng Xi's family was moving. He wanted to go and see, but he was afraid of arousing Bohe and his wife's suspicion, so he had to take a book and read it casually in the room. He was worried and couldn't read, so he sat at the desk and wrote a few letters. In the afternoon, he thought that Feng Xi's new house must have been decorated, so it would be best to go and see it at this time. If they have arranged it inappropriately, they can correct it immediately. But from the attitude of my cousin and his wife, they are almost watching every step of my steps. Once I go out, I can't help but be suspicious again when I come back. I am embarrassed and can't calm down, so I'd better not go. I have given myself such a difficult problem. As dusk approached, a ray of sunlight from the corner of the house shone obliquely on the whitewashed wall in the east. The upper half of the wisteria trellis seemed to be lightly smeared with a layer of gold powder. As for the lower half of the trellis, it was gloomy again. The many bonsais arranged on the ground had just been sprayed with water from the watering can, which made them look particularly charming and gave off a refreshing fragrance. Jiashu was wandering back and forth under the two vermilion pillars in the corridor. Liu Fu walked in from outside and asked, "Master, why didn't you go out today?" Jiashu smiled and nodded, but didn't say anything. He immediately remembered, "Yes, I go out every day because last night, I found the fat marks on my face, so I won't go out today, and the marks will be more obvious. I just went out as usual, not caring, so that they couldn't tell the reason. So I changed my clothes, put on a hat, and went to Feng Xi's new place." This is the house that Jiashu has chosen. It is a small house with a separate entrance and courtyard. There are two bright rooms and one dark room in the north. One room is used as Shan Danyang's bedroom and the other as Feng Xi's bedroom. The room in the middle is left empty as Feng Xi's study. There are two east and west wing rooms outside. One room is for Shen Sangshuan and the other is for the kitchen. It is not cramped at all. There are two locust trees in the yard that are as big as the eaves. At this time, the newly sprouted green leaves are blooming all over the trees, reflecting the green on the ground. On some branches, one or two newly opened white flowers are exposed, and there is a fragrance. This alley leads to a main street. Not far away, there is a women's vocational school. Feng Xi has already registered and paid the tuition here. Now Jiashu arrived here. When he looked outside the door, he saw a white wall with a bunch of green leaves on the top of the wall. Two small doors with vermilion lacquer were closed in the middle of the white wall. It was really interesting to look at. As soon as Jiashu knocked on the door, he heard footsteps from inside. He opened the door and saw Feng Xi standing there with a smile on his face. Jiashu said, "You didn't know I would come today, did you?" Feng Xi said, "As soon as I knocked on the door, I knew it was you, so I came to open the door myself. Yesterday I asked you to wipe your face before leaving. Why didn't you respond?" Jiashu smiled and said, "I don't blame you. But do you blame me? Why do you have so much rouge on your lips?" Feng Xi didn't wait for him to finish, and walked inside. Jiashu followed him in. Aunt Shen came out from the north room and smiled. "What are you so happy about? You were happy outside and came in." Jiashu said, "You moved to a new house. I should congratulate you. Why not?" As he spoke, he walked into the north room, and it was indeed newly decorated. Aunt Shen did not hesitate to pull the door curtain on the right with one hand high, meaning to let Jiashu in. He did not even think about it, and went in. The room was brightly papered. Just as Feng Shi said yesterday, it was a room full of white furniture. There was a fake iron bed on top, also white, and the bedding was also white, but it was covered with a small red velvet blanket. Jiashu smiled and said, "Since everything is white, why is the blanket red?" Aunt Shen smiled and said, "Young people, how can they not love red and green? I have some other meaning here, and you, such a smart person, should not be unaware of it." Jiashu said, "I am too stupid. I don't understand unless you tell me. Tell me, what else is wrong here?" Aunt Shen was about to say something, but Feng Shi came in from the outside room and shouted, "Mom, don't say anything." Aunt Shen saw her come in, so she lowered the door curtain and walked away. Feng Shi said, "Look, is this room clean?" Jiashu smiled and said, "You are so comfortable. Now you live in a room by yourself and sleep in a bed by yourself. It is a world of difference from before. How are you going to thank me?" Feng Shi lowered her head, arranged the bed sheets, and said with a smile, "There is nothing special about sleeping on such a small wooden bed now. I will thank you again when you give me a big copper bed in the future." Jiashu said, "That's easy. But I don't quite understand the word special. How can sleeping on a copper bed be special?" Feng Shi said, "What's there to not understand? It's just comfortable. Don't say any more. If you say more, I will be annoyed." She glanced at Jiashu and smiled. Jiashu took a look around the wall and said with a smile, "It's well papered, but it's not good to be so bare. Let me find you something to decorate it." Feng Shi said, "I only want one thing. You can take care of the rest." Jiashu said, "What one thing do you want? How much does it cost?" Feng Shi said, "You deserve a beating for what you said. Don't I ask you for anything except for spending money?" Jiashu smiled and said, "I misunderstood. I thought you wanted to buy some valuable antiques, calligraphy and paintings, not that you wanted money." Feng Shi said, "Antiques, calligraphy and paintings can't compare to this. Only you have this thing. I wonder if you are willing to show it to me?" Jiashu said, "Only I have it. What is it? I can't remember it. Let me guess." Jiashu clasped his hands in front of his chest and raised his head to think about it. Feng Shi smiled and said, "Don't guess. I'll tell you. I saw several sisters. Each of them had a frame of enlarged photos in their room. I want a large photo of you to hang in this room. Is that okay?" Jiashu never expected that she would say such a thing solemnly, and smiled. "I don't know what you are talking about. It turns out you want a photo of me." "Yes, yes, yes." Feng Shi smiled and said, "When I lived in Shuik Hutong before, I didn't dare to ask you for it. Hanging your photo in such a dirty room would make me feel uneasy. Now that we have moved here, it is much cleaner, and half of it can be said to be your home." When Feng Shi said this, she shrugged her shoulders and stuck out her tongue, saying, "I was wrong." Aunt Shen interrupted from outside, "Why was I wrong? Everything here, inside and out, was spent by Mr. Fan. Can you say that he doesn't get half of the share? It would be best if all of it belonged to Mr. Fan, child, but I'm afraid you don't have that great luck." After saying that, she burst into laughter. Jiashu didn't know how to respond, but Feng Shi pulled his collar and made faces. Jiashu smiled, feeling a kind of happiness that was hard to describe. Since this weather, the Shen family almost treated Jiashu as a family member and let him come and go as he pleased. Jiashu had originally discussed the conditions with Aunt Shen. Feng Shi would study from then on and would not perform. In addition to paying Feng Shi's tuition, Jiashu also provided the Shen family with 50 yuans of household expenses every month. Shen Sangshuan ate and drank at home, and he went out to perform, but she didn't care about him. But those friends who were not good enough were not allowed to be brought home. Aunt Shen said, "He is a very lazy person. With food, drink, and shelter, why would he go to the overpass to earn those 30 or 50 copper coins?" Jiashu felt that what he said was right, so he felt relieved. A few days later, Feng Shi made a few more student-style dresses, and Jiashu personally sent them to the cram school of the women's vocational school, and gave her another school name, Feng Shi. This school was set up for women who wanted to find jobs on their own, so Feng Shi was not considered old in the school. She knew a few words and could barely attend the classes. However, after a few days of classes, she asked Jiashu to buy her a few things. The first was a watch. The second was a pair of two-piece high-heeled leather shoes. The third was a white silk scarf. She said that her classmates all had them, so she couldn't live without them. Jiashu also thought that she was a new student, so he didn't want to let her lose face and spoil her fun, so he bought them all. 2 days later, Fengxi asked him for 2 more things. One was a fountain pen, the other was a pair of tortoise-shell-rimmed glasses. Jiashu smiled and said, "You haven't learned all the English letters yet. What do you need a fountain pen for?" "That's fine. You're not nearsighted or farsighted. You're fine. Why do you need glasses?" Fengxi said, "Fountain pens can be used to write Chinese characters. Glasses can be bought without tickets, and can be worn even if you are not nearsighted." Jiashu smiled and said, "Don't mention it. All your classmates have them, so you have to buy them. As long as you study hard, I don't care about this, so I will buy them for you. If your classmates have them and you don't have them, just tell me, and I can help you." Fengxi smiled and said, "There is one thing, but I'm afraid you don't agree with it." Jiashu said, "Whether you agree or not is another question. Tell me what it is first." Fengxi said, "I see that among my classmates, 7 or 8 out of 10 wear gold rings. I want to wear one too." Jiashu looked at her face for a long time, then smiled and said, "What do you think? How should it be worn?" "Wearing it wrong will make a fool of yourself." Fengxi said, "What's there to understand?" As he spoke, he stretched out his little finger, hooked it, and smiled, and said, "What's wrong with wearing it on this finger?" Jiashu said, "What does that mean?" "You said it." Fengxi said, "If you want me to tell you, I will tell you. That's celibacy." Jiashu said, "What does celibacy mean?" Fengxi lowered her head and ran out of the room, then said, "It doesn't matter if you don't buy anything for me. Why do you keep asking me? It makes me feel embarrassed." Jiashu smiled and said to Aunt Shen, "My tuition fee was finally worth it. Fengxi has only studied for a few days, and has learned all these tricks." Aunt Shen only said, "It's the age of reform," and laughed. The next day was a Sunday. After lunch, Jiashu asked Fengxi to go to the street and bought a fountain pen and a pair of air glasses. Then he went to the gold and pearl shop and bought her a pure gold ring. She had already put on the glasses and clipped the fountain pen to her lapel with a pen holder. Only the gold ring was kept on her body, and she never wore it. Jiashu sent her home and asked her why she didn't wear the ring. Fengxi and Jiashu were talking in the house. As usual, Aunt Shen avoided them. At this time, Fengxi took Jiashu's hand and said, "You know everything. Why are you pretending to be confused about such a small matter?" Then, she handed him the small box containing the ring, stretched out her left hand in front of him, and said with a smile, "Put it on me." Jiashu smiled and agreed with a yes. He held Fengxi's hand with his left hand, clamped the ring with 2 fingers of his right hand, and asked Fengxi, "Which finger should it be on?" Fengxi smiled, raised her ring finger, and said, "This one." Jiashu said, "You are confused. I just said that I would maintain celibacy yesterday." "To maintain celibacy, does it mean to wear it on the ring finger?" Fengxi said, "I understand, but you are confused. If I wear it on my little finger, why would I ask you to put it on me?" Jiashu held her ring finger, gently put the ring on it, looked at her and smiled. "Once you put it on, your surname will be Fan, do you understand?" Fengxi stretched her finger upwards and put the ring on it, then she ran away and fell on a small table in front of the window, giggling. Jiashu smiled and said, don't laugh, I have a few questions for you. When you go to school tomorrow, your classmates will see your ring and ask who gave it to you. What will you say?" Fengxi smiled and said, "I thought it was something important." "You asked it seriously. So what's the big deal?" "I'll just say yes casually." Jiashu said, "Okay. If I were your classmate, I would ask, 'Hey, Miss Shen, you are so happy. There is something on your hand today. Who is that person?' Fengxi said, "That person is the one who gave me the ring." Jiashu said, "How did you meet? Can you tell us about the story of your love?" Fengxi said, "He is my cousin, and my cousin is him. Is that okay?" Jiashu smiled and said, "Okay, how can I become your cousin again?" Fengxi said, "If you say so, it will save you a lot of trouble." Jiashu said, "Do you have a cousin?" Fengxi said, "Yes, but he is too young. He is still 30 years away from being 100 years old." Jiashu said, "Why are you so happy today?" Fengxi said, "I am happy. Aren't you happy?" "To be honest with you, I have always been worried, but now I am very relieved. How can I not be happy?" Seeing her true feelings and innocence, Jiashu was also very happy. He slept on the small wooden bed, with his feet straight up and placed on the high railing at the top of the bed, and he was still swaying. Aunt Shen asked in the next room, "You have been so happy since you came back. What are you so happy about? Tell me. Feng Shi said. I won't tell you today. You will know tomorrow. When Aunt Shen saw Feng Shi was so happy, she thought that Jiashu had given her a lot of money again, so she asked Jiashu to stay for dinner. She personally went to a nearby restaurant to order a few dishes, leaving Feng Shi alone to accompany her. Jiashu also felt that he was talking too much, and after dinner, he wanted to walk around a few times, but then sat down again. In the end, he held his hat in his hand and sat for 30 minutes before leaving. It was already past 12 o'clock when he got home. Jiashu walked into the room and turned on the light, but saw a small square on his desk. Flowered silk handkerchief. I picked it up and smelled it. It was fragrant. It must be a woman's thing. Could it be that my cousin came to my room and left it here? I picked it up and looked carefully. On the corner of the handkerchief, there were 3 English letters Halon, embroidered in red and green thread. My cousin's name is Chen Huifeng. These 3 letters are very different from the pronunciation of that name. Of course, it's not her. If it's not her, how could there be another woman in this room who uses this flowered handkerchief? I was very puzzled. At this time, Liu Fu brought in tea and said with a smile, My cousin, you have been out for a long time today. A stranger came to visit you. As he said that, he presented a nickname. Jiashu took it and looked at it, and suddenly realized it. It turned out that the handkerchief was left by this female guest, who had never interacted with him before, so he regarded it as an unexpected encounter. If you want to know what kind of woman this is, I will tell you next time. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.